So failing fast for me, I think, is acknowledging early on when you've made the wrong choice. Those retrospectives are pivotal in also acknowledging that you are failing. It's just that mental block that you don't want to open the email because you don't want to acknowledge that it could be bad news, and if it is bad news, you don't want to know. And it's the same thing with failure. You don't want to acknowledge the failure, because if you acknowledge the failure, then you have to unwind things and you have to change things, and change is hard. And acknowledging failure means that you have to take some accountability. But at the end of the day, you can't move forward unless you acknowledge the failure.
Yeah, and that's, I think, takes a lot of courage, is having those kind of conversations, but also being able to face the truth of the moment. Yeah.
And giving a new leader a framework to say, this is the retrospective framework. This is how you use it. But people need frameworks. Like, new managers need frameworks. Otherwise, they are just going to shy away from having these tough conversations, from acknowledging failure, from dealing with, from helping people take accountability for what they've messed up. You cannot just throw a manager in the deep end and expect them to have these conversations. It's not possible.
Welcome to Risk and Rise, the podcast where we explore the journey of overcoming the fear of failure, embracing risk, and achieving success in entrepreneurship, creativity, and personal growth. I'm your host, Talana Simpson, and I'm thrilled to embark on this journey with you. Together, we'll discover the strategies, insights, and shifts in our thinking and attitudes that are needed to turn setbacks into stepping stones and transform fear into fuel for success. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's dive into today's episode of Risk and Rise. Today we are risking and rising with Anne Gray of Solutioneers and the Leaders Library. She has a vast experience in terms of the corporate world, as well as owning businesses, selling them, and now supporting other business owners to grow their businesses and scale them from really small to big organizations. So we're going to learn from her experience, her story, as well as learn about some great resources and exercises that we can use today in our businesses as we explore risking and rising. Welcome, and to get going, what comes to mind when you hear risk and rise?
So I think that regardless of your station in life, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you are a grade 11 trying out for the first team hockey, if you want to just take a step up in life, if you want to chase your dreams, you have to take certain risks. You have to put yourself out there. And so I think that's what comes to mind, is what is the risk that you have to take in order to take that next step forward or that next step upwards, and knowing that the risk may or may not work out. They say, like, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. Sometimes it's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And I think it's, taking those 3 steps forward, knowing that there's a possibility that you will take 2 steps backwards, and being okay with that.
And from what I know about your career, you've done that a number of times. You've taken a number of steps forward, and from my perspective, some risks. And so I'd love you to just share a bit about that background, about your story, and maybe specifically, like, because I know you've been involved, you've worked yourself up, I think, the corporate ladder, if I can call it like that. You've owned a business, you've sold it, you've now started a business. So you've almost covered so many aspects of being in business. But tell us a bit about that, but also if they highlight maybe some of those risks you took.
Yeah. So, Talana, my career actually started, I did my honors in marine ecology and fishery science. Yeah. And just really because that was the part of my BSc degree that I enjoyed the most. And then when I was finished, going scuba diving and playing on the beach, I didn't really know what I was going to do with myself. And so the local high school was looking for a science teacher. And I was like, I'm pretty good at talking. I'm not intimidated in front of people. I come from a family of teachers. I have a natural kind of ability to communicate information. So yeah, sure, why not give it a go? Anyway, I ended up teaching for 7 years and really, really enjoyed it. But I got to the point in my career where I went to the headmistress, took a risk, put myself out there, told her that I felt that I was ready for a promotion post, and she said no. And I felt, I felt differently. I felt that I really was ready for something different. And so I just decided, well, that's it. If we're not going to move forward in this school where I'm teaching, then I'm going to look elsewhere. So put my CV out there and had a couple of options on the table and went to work for a company where they were doing. So when I looked at the job description, I thought I was going to be a project manager. Like that's what I thought I was going to be doing. It's really not what I was doing, but it was a telecommunications managed services company. And that's how I got into the corporate world, was just kind of putting myself out there with the leadership, and leadership saying, no, sorry, we don't want to make our leadership team any bigger. And me going, well, thank you very much, then this is not the right place for me. And then going into this corporate world. Now, it was a small company that I was working for, but I was working on site at Liberty Life head office in Joburg, huge. So, I mean, I had never experienced anything like this in my life before. And just really worked in that company sort of faithfully for several years. And then when I had my daughter, I had to replace myself. Because it was a small company, I couldn't step out of the organization and them not feel it. And so they said, right, you need to replace yourself. We're going to recruit. We're going to hire somebody to take your job. And I was like, what's going to happen to me when I come back? And they were like, don't worry, we'll figure it out. But you've got to help us hire the person who's going to replace you. So I found the person to replace me, and I trained her, and sort of like a month to go before the baby was born, I didn't have anything to do. Spent hours cleaning up my Outlook inbox because in those days I hadn't heard about Inbox Zero. So and then came back from maternity leave and sort of walked in and said, okay, what am I going to be doing? And they said, well, that team that you were a part of, you're actually going to lead that team now. And so, the risk paid off. I ended up leading the team and ended up starting a division of the business, starting the sort of mobile managed services division of the business. And from that opportunity, the directors gave me equity because I'd been instrumental in starting this new product. When I say they gave me equity, I had to, buy the equity. But yes, I became an equity partner in the business in 2018. And then in 2022, the business partner said, yeah, he's ready to retire. He wants to retire overseas. Would I like to take over the whole business? And I just said, no. I've been in this business now for 14 years. It's telecoms. It's really your thing. I was a lot more excited about managing the people and working with people and setting up new processes and systems. But if, taking over this business and being sort of Mrs. Telecoms, no, I didn't want to be that. I didn't want to be that. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be the managing director and in charge of 15 people. And so we sold that business and parted ways, and started I sort of started my consulting business, and that was in itself tumultuous because I had a handover sort of earn out period where I had to make sure that I made the numbers, and handed over the people and got the domain knowledge out of my head and, handed that over to the new owner of the business. And at the end of that 12-month period, I looked at myself, I was like, what am I going to do with myself? Like, really, really, what am I going to do? And what I had thought I was going to do at the beginning of that period, I just hadn't been working out. I'd been looking for clients and I'd been sending out proposals and I'd been talking to lots of people in the time that I had, that I wasn't sort of doing handovers, and nothing, when you're trying so hard and nothing is germinating, like all of those seeds that you've planted, nothing comes up. And that's what was happening. It just felt like I was tilting at the wind. And so I went on a silent retreat for a day. And I felt very clearly at the end of the silent retreat that I was going to just spend time really just experimenting. Just anything that came my way, I was going to say yes to. And I was going to try as many things as I could try. And if it felt like a good idea, I was going to give it a go and see what stuck. Because I felt like I wanted my new business to reflect who I am as an individual, to be very aligned to my personal values. And so anything that came along that was aligned to those values, any opportunity that came along. I mean, I spoke at a conference in Cape Town, and I wrote a training course for a property management company. I did all sorts of things in that sort of 5-month period from August till the end of 2023. And one of the things that I did was I ran a read-along of Radical Candor by Kim Scott. Do you know that book?
Heard of it. I haven't. It's on my list. Yeah. One of the many books on my list.
So exactly me. I had wanted to read the book for years, and I just felt like it would be a great book to read. But I thought, well, let me read it with others. So I invited kind of my email list to say, hey, I'm doing this thing. I'm reading this book. Who wants to join? And I think I had one of my customers joined me. And I think I had 6 or 7 people who joined for the read-along and said, oh, this sounds like a great experiment. Let's do it. So we did that, and that went really well. We read a chapter a week. We came together as a group. We chatted about what we had read. And then one of the ladies on the course said to me, Anne, you know what we need to do? Grow Your Small Business Next by Donald Miller. But we need to do it for OTs and physios and dietitians, allied healthcare professionals, because they don't know what they're doing in their businesses. And she was an OT. So she said, let's do it. So I said, okay, cool, let's do it. Because I'm saying yes to everything, right? And so, so we did. We ran this small group and we had physios, dietitians, OTs. And it was super successful, and they really loved it. And I picked up a couple of clients out of that, consulting clients who really wanted to sort of double down on an area of their business that they felt like they weren't getting any traction on. And then I was like, wow, this is actually helping small businesses sort of double click on something that they've been stuck on. This is where it's at. So I started 2024 with a brand new sort of goal for myself, and that was to help 60 entrepreneurs through the Leaders Library, through read-alongs, develop something within themselves that they have felt was lacking, and really to help 6 entrepreneurs in the next 18 months double-click on something that has been bothering them. They've been meaning to do that marketing copy and redo their website, but they just haven't found the time. Or they've been meaning to automate processes and systems within their business, but they just don't have the expertise to do that. Or they've been meaning to build a sales funnel, but they haven't got a clue where to start. You know what I mean? So those are the kinds of things. It's like, let's help people double click. So so that's what I've been doing. And it really has just been a case of going, let's just say yes. And see what sticks. And now that I've seen what sticks, now it's about going, okay, so all of this sticks. Got to kind of niche it down, right? And find that niche. And because you can't do all of this as a solopreneur, you got to be wise. So now it is about kind of going, all right, let's work with entrepreneurs who want to start businesses or scale businesses to fix things in their business that need fixing.
And so, and that's more your consultancy expertise is helping the businesses fix that. And if I'm correct, using technology.
Yes. So both. So some of them we need to use technology. We need to automate. We need to put systems in place. So yes. Some of them it's leadership problems. So it's working with the leadership to try and create a cohesive team, to try and create a vision that isn't just like a nice 3 sentences on the wall, but it's actually implementable and actionable. And that, that vision drives the setting of goals and the measuring of things and the actual strategic tasks within the business. So, and then I've started working with, Raise Corp, who've developed a system called Flowcode. And so that then helps people. It does give them a system to implement to sort of help them start working through the things that they don't have the answers for in their businesses yet, that will help them to scale.
So I want to touch base on that just now when we get to the resources for entrepreneurs. We're going to, because it's a very interesting system. But then just going back, so now we've got an idea of your story and that, and it's amazing how you took risks in terms of asking for what you want, but also being open to whatever comes. I find that it's almost a risk to not know and just to say yes to what's coming, and take that forward. But along that journey, then, have you had any failures, anything that really just went wrong? Because part of Risk and Rise is talking about failure and our fear around that. So has there been a chapter or an episode or a project or something that you may not, but other people may have labeled it a failure, that we can just understand what happened and how you dealt with it?
Yeah, I mean, and there's like a failure, and then there's a failure, there's a scale. But yes, definitely. So, when we were running the managed services business, and initially, as you do with all businesses, you bootstrap as long as you can. And we were delivering services to a couple of blue chip South African corporates, and we were managing everything on Excel. And then you've got 2 people working on the same customer, and this one's putting assets in and this one's taking assets out, and version control of an Excel document, and it was giving me sleepless nights. And so I sat down with an architect and I said, this is the system that we need to build. And so I sort of did it all over a whiteboard and wireframes and all these cool things. And we're like, right, we are going to build a system where 2 people can work on the same customer from different locations, and we're not going to create conflicting assets in the asset register, and it's going to be amazing. And so we appointed a vendor to help us build this thing, and they sold themselves so amazingly. They sounded like they were going to just be amazing. And 6 weeks in, I was just like, we are not getting anywhere. These guys just do not, as much as we try and explain how this data fits together, they just are not understanding the architecture of these relational database tables, essentially. And no matter how we tried to push forward with them, we just really couldn't. And we actually had to pull the plug. We had to pull the plug on the whole project. We had bought expensive licenses from the UK that had to be heavily customized. And we were sitting now with these licenses that we paid for in pounds. And it was literally just a bucket of bolts. It wasn't a thing that we could use. And then we had to go through a process of finding a vendor who could actually come and finish this software development. And I will never forget my partner saying to me at the beginning of this project, he was like, this is a software development project. Are you sure you want to do this? I'd never done a software development project or run it myself before. I was like, yeah, how hard can it be? I'm forever scarred. Software development projects, I want to stay away. So yeah, so we eventually we found somebody in the UK that could help us like get the thing standing up. Again, paying in pounds because these guys are sitting in the UK. And yeah, we got it standing up. We got it sort of working. And then it was the painful process of trying to get ourselves a South African supplier who we could work with, who knew the system, who really did have the architect that was qualified to build the thing. Yeah, so that was absolutely painful. It was, firstly, I had to admit that I didn't know what I was doing, running a software project, that I had chosen the wrong partner based on the fantastic job that they had done in the sales cycle. And that we, when it didn't work, that we had to lay the dream down and say, back onto Excel, back onto spreadsheets for as long as it takes for us to get this thing standing up. So, I think it took us 6 months in the end, which was supposed to take 6 weeks, took 6 months. And the system's great and it works now. And it's really stable and it manages those assets beautifully. And it was part of the art that sold when we sold the business. But it was so painful. And it all worked out in the end. But it was one of those life lessons where I was like, I don't want to be an IT software project manager. Yeah.
So that's the learning, yes?
Yes, that was the learning. That was definitely the learning. Another failure that comes to mind is, I had this amazing, I launched a course 2 years ago, and my plan was for this thing to be a digital online asset. It was going to make money for me while I was asleep. It was going to be incredible. And not one person has bought it. So yeah.
So how have you managed? So what's been your inner work in order to manage those two? So one, you eventually succeeded it, but it was very painful, very costly, the software development, and then the course that just no one has bought. So whatever the learnings were from there, but what has been your inner work to get up the next day or a few days later, or I don't know how you managed it?
So once upon a time, we all did psychometric tests in the organization that I worked for. Yes, there were psychometric Enneagram tests.
Yes.
And
yes.
The Enneagram coach sat me down and she said, you are probably the most positive person I have ever met. And so I sort of coined the phrase, I have a positive outlook problem. And I do. And it stops me from really seeing the pitfalls of the ideas, these grand ideas that I have. And luckily, when I was working with the team, I had a lady that worked for me in Mpumi. And I am a 7, so I'm a visionary. I have all these fabulous ideas. And Mpumi is a 6. And I'm a 7 wing 8. So not only do I have really great ideas, but I'm really assertive about communicating them and getting people on board. And we're going to do this and off we go. And I really do not tend to sort of the 6 side of things. And so one of the things that I loved was Mpumi would very respectfully come and find me after I'd had one of my grand plan, we're going left. And she would sit me down and she would say, did you think about this? And did you think about this? And the 6 is the loyal skeptic, right? So she was super loyal, but she was a skeptic. And I learned to test my ideas with the skeptic, before I just like launched myself off a cliff that I didn't realize was a cliff. And it's a bit like a really enthusiastic border collie who is chasing a ball and doesn't realize that they are about to like go over the edge of the embankment. And that is me to a T. And Mpumi is that person who would just sit me down and say, you really need to think a little bit harder about the consequences of this. And what if that goes wrong? And we need to come up with this mitigation. And so I would say that the inner work that I've had to do now that I'm a solopreneur is that I have to take a step back and say, okay, if we do this, what could go wrong? Which is super hard. It's not a strength of mine. What are the details that need to be worked out if we go down this road? What if we launch this idea? What is the cash flow forecast? I mean, just let's start there. So yeah, the inner work is really admitting to myself and acknowledging that I have a positive outlook problem that needs to be carefully managed.
No, it's quite wise, because here it's the self-awareness that has helped you then to find a different strategy in looking at the ideas so that they can be more successful.
Yeah, but I wouldn't have really known or been able to acknowledge all of that unless I had done that work with the Enneagram coach, who was able to say, do you realize this about yourself? And I didn't. And so I think doing those sort of personality assessments, understanding where your strengths are is great, but then where are your blind spots? What do you need to look out for? The other thing that I can do is I can be very, very busy. And the busyness just is all consuming. I have lots to do all the time. I have a long to-do list all the time. And that busy, and I know when I'm getting into trouble with myself, when I actually stop consulting my to-do list on a daily basis, and I just launch into action mode, sit down behind my laptop, turn it on. It's probably actually not even turned off, let's be honest. Like, wake the screen up, and just keep on hammering away at whatever it was I was hammering away at yesterday. And it's totally unstrategic. It's an unplanned day. I get to the end of the day, I'm like, what have I achieved? I cannot see what I've achieved because I wasn't able to tick off. These are the important things that need to get done today. So I need to ground myself in lists and in some sort of quiet thinking. I need to make time at the end of every week to do some bookkeeping work, some really mundane finances, to make sure that I'm on top of the types of the things in your business that restrain you, and say, pay attention to this. This is important.
I also wanted to ask you there about, rising up in the ranks of your career. I'm not sure if we may have covered it, but were you ever scared of taking the next step, of the next role, or wondering if you're not actually good enough for it? It's called the imposter syndrome. I was wondering if there's any of that in your story.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely. So yeah, I think I identified in about 2014, 2015. Now I've been back from maternity leave for about a year and a half, and we were talking with the directors about equity. I mean, I started that conversation with them in 2014, and I only got equity in 2018, so it took time. And I realized I didn't know much about running a business. I knew a lot about fish and biology and science and chemistry and ionic bonding. I could do all of that. But when it came to actually running a business, I didn't know anything. I really didn't. Everything I had learned had been, and I had been hands-on. I'd been technical. I'd been looking after people's cell phones and telecom lines and negotiating deals with telecom and, putting things in and taking things out. And that's what I've been doing. But, if I was going to have equity in a company, I was going to be responsible for running the business. I needed to understand business, and I didn't. And I think for me, the only way to close that gap was to go and study. So in 2016, I started my MBA. And I think a large part of it was because I felt completely under-resourced, ill-equipped to be able to run a business. And so I decided that an MBA was the best way to equip myself and get on top of closing that functional gap. And actually, the first 9 months of the MBA is now called the PG dip, and you do those core modules like HR and management accounting, and that was actually enough. That was enough to give me an understanding of how to read a balance sheet and what do you need to do when you're hiring and doing KPIs and all of that kind of stuff. So that was enough to sort of get me into like management. And I unfortunately had a miscarriage just towards the end of that 9-month PG dip. And so we also had a bit of a fallout in the business with a key resource leaving. And so my business partner asked me to put it down and not to carry on with the MBA. And I felt like I'd ticked the boxes I needed ticked in terms of the functional understanding of how things worked. And so I did put it down. And I didn't carry on with it in 2017 until COVID. And in COVID, I could see that my career was going to take a much more sort of consulting path, whether I stayed with Torch or whether I exited the business. And at that point, we weren't selling. We didn't know. But I was starting to do a lot more digital transformation consulting with my clients. And the telecoms business was being run by other people, and I was starting to go in this digital transformation direction. And we were sitting in front of a CIO one day, and we were having this conversation about the digital transformation project, and we were going to build him a robotics process automation. And he looked at me and he said, "But Anne, what qualifies you to talk to me about digital transformation?" I was like, just experience, and the fact that I'm intellectually curious and that I know we can solve this problem and that you don't have the cycles to solve it and I do. But that really wasn't enough of an answer for him. And I thought, shucks, if I am going to sell myself as a digital transformation consultant, I'm going to have to get some like academic research behind my name. So I went and finished the MBA in 2021. And I did my research project in digital transformation so that I had the knowledge and the background and the acumen. And I mean, I think it was a very, very valuable exercise. Getting that real academic understanding of digital transformation and what makes a successful digital transformation, what are the pitfalls to look out for, and how to measure the success, what to expect in the project. So it was good, but the imposter syndrome, that CIO saying to me, "What qualifies you to have this conversation with me?" That was very grounding.
So it's interesting because usually the imposter syndrome is around, we feel like an imposter, like a fraud, even though we do have the knowledge. And it's so nice. So you did have the knowledge, but then you added on, like actually getting a qualification to fit the outside world's perception of you're not qualified until you have a piece of paper that says you are.
Yeah, and I also think there's a gender issue here as well. If you are female and you are talking to a male CIO, and he's got a lot more gray hair than I do, and there's definitely a bit of a gender barrier. Like, you don't have a BSc IT, so how can you speak to me about IT? I mean, you don't know what kind of BSc I've got, quite frankly, but it's just It's like, the lack of propeller on my head makes me unqualified to speak about technical things. So I need to go and, get, and maybe it wasn't necessary. Maybe the piece of paper wasn't necessary. The CIO was never, ever going to buy what I was selling. But I certainly felt if I was going to pursue a career in consulting, that I needed to do that strategic portion of the MBA, which I did, and which I will never regret doing.
Yes.
because it did help with my strategic thinking, and it has opened up, different avenues of thinking. But yeah, I think the imposter syndrome for me was, I needed to overcome imposter syndrome by knowing that I had put in the work, that I had put in the 1,000 hours or the 10,000 hours or whatever it is to overcome. In fact, I did a little calculation to be like, okay, when have I done my 10,000 hours of digital transformation?
It's cool, which is a way of measuring. It's always useful to measure things. So it's interesting that you brought in that may have been a gender bias that prompted that type of conversation. I'm quite interested also in what's happening in the South African context. So I don't know if there's any other biases or challenges you find as a woman in entrepreneur, starting your own business. And if there's anything you notice within the South African context around the challenges of starting a business, and, is there something unique to our country that you have noticed or come up against?
I think until recently, there wasn't a lot of support for female founders. But I think that's been challenged, especially by, what's their names? Future females. I don't know if you know Lauren Dallas, and I can't remember her business partner's name. Lauren is really the face of it. So, but they have started a community for female founders. And they started that community in 2022 or 2023 based on the fact that there was such a lack of support for female founders. Last year I joined a coaching accelerator, which was also for women only. And so, and 2 years before that, I joined a women only group for customer experience professionals, WIX, which was also based in the UK. So what I did find was, up until about 2 years ago, there wasn't much support for women entrepreneurs in South Africa. But if you went outside of South Africa, you could find it. But that's kind of, and then that trend was reversed when Lauren and Serena started Future Females. So there are communities for women. If you go looking for them, you will find them. You'll find them very easily. None of them are free to join. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons why we also started the Leaders Library, which is a community for small business owners. It's not exclusively for women, but we find the majority of our members are women and I think it's because, the three of us who got it going initially, Pamela, Shelley, and myself, we're women. And so our networks are very female. And so we have, quite a lot of women coming in. At this point in time, all of the collaborators that I've worked with who have run read-alongs have all been women. But that doesn't mean we don't have men in our groups. We have men in every single cohort. And I think there's something important about making sure that everybody's voice is heard, Yes. I think there's something important about making sure that there are men around the table because they bring a different perspective. And so when you have a coaching group, I'm always excited when it's diverse, in that it's gender diverse, it's racially diverse, and potentially even LGBTQ diverse. And you've got people around the table who have got different perspectives, who are able to open you up into different ways of thinking. When we're doing How to Grow Your Small Business, which is a book by Donald Miller, where we do that book, we've got people in consulting businesses, people in services businesses, people making nail polish. We've got all sorts of businesses. And, the nail polish lady solves very different problems to the customer experience consultant, but they're still able to help each other. They're still able to give each other the support and ideas and think out the box because, that's the beauty of having that diverse that diverse group of people in the room who can almost coach one another. I mean, and that's the beauty of it, right?
Yes.
When we do, so one of the courses that Pumla, who's the OT, and I run is called Grow Your Healthcare Practice. It's a 2-day course. We bring healthcare professionals together and we give them the business background that they never got at med school. And when we ran that course, it's so awesome to have GPs in the same room as OTs talking about their businesses, talking about marketing, talking about how there's no communication between the two of them and how to solve that problem and how valuable it will be. And I mean, I just stand back and I just let this group of people talk to each other because they haven't talked to each other about these types of problems before. They've talked to each other about a patient and how to solve that problem, but not how to solve this overall communication problem. So yeah, the diversity in community is really important. And while it's been great to have female founders and future females and women in CX and all of these female groups that I have joined, I do think it's important to make sure that we have that male context, because we work in a world with everybody, not just with women.
Yeah, and the only way we're going to actually, as you said, get the communication that leads to better understanding, which would lead to better solutions, better opportunities for everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone, all the voices are being heard. Oh, well done. That sounds really awesome. And maybe just to touch the base then, because you mentioned a few times, how can people learn more about learning?
The
Leaders Library.
Yeah. So it's a platform. It's not on. I mean, we've got a Facebook page, right? But the platform isn't a Facebook group. It isn't a WhatsApp group. It's off all of that, so it's a little bit less distraction. And you just go to www.leaderslibrary.co.za. And sign up. It's free to join. And what we're trying to do is put useful resources for business owners or people who are trying to improve their leadership, or maybe people who are thinking about starting a business, useful resources in there, but also to run read-alongs. So we have one going at any one point of time. At the moment, we're just about to finish Profit First, which has been incredible. We've been walking a journey with 7 businesses who are setting up this way of managing their money differently. So about to finish that. The next one will start as Dare to Lead. And that one is really specifically for leadership development, And we look at sort of the 6 areas of business. So we look at leadership. We look at operations, so like how to manage people and that kind of thing. We look at marketing. We look at sales. We look at managing your money, and we look at product innovation and development. So read-alongs are always around one of those types of topics. And if you see a read-along that's coming up that you like, you just pay your commitment fee, which is really just there to hold you accountable to doing the work, because people don't value what they don't pay for. And then you join the 8-week read-along, and when you're done, join the next one if you want to. But the idea is that the community keeps on encouraging one another. So we try and do a webinar or a podcast, put that in there every single month. Try and answer a question. Last month, we answered the question around owner's compensation. So if you are an owner of a business, should you pay yourself a bonus or should you pay yourself a dividend? Like when is it the right time to do which thing? And so we sat with an accountant and we answered that question last month. This month we're actually answering a question specifically for the healthcare professionals, because did you know you can't just register a business, a PTY or whatever you want to register if you're a healthcare professional. There's actually quite a lot of rules around that. So we answered that question this month. And so we answer different questions for our community each month, and we will start a mastermind soon. So we'll start a scale your business up mastermind, which will be like a brand new offering. It will bring together kind of a lot of the principles from all the different books that we've been exploring, to create a bit more of a holistic experience for a business owner who needs something. But yeah, I think for me, it's about being inclusive. It's about including businesses that are just starting and they haven't even hit their 1 million rand revenue mark. It's about including men and women. And it's about including people who aren't necessarily business owners, but they are business leaders and they are leaning in the direction of starting a business or perhaps taking over a business, becoming the general manager or the CEO of something. And now they find themselves in unfamiliar territory.
And I wanted to then ask you more about leadership, because that's one of your areas of interest and experience. And we're looking here in Risk and Rise about promoting making mistakes, basically, because we know that, or not promoting making mistakes, but embracing when mistakes happen because of the learnings and it's inevitable. There's always going to be things that don't work in that. So I'd like to hear your view on that as a leader. How do you, because there's also, if we want to be innovative and try new things and try and solve a problem, sometimes the solution you throw it's not going to work. I mean, your story about creating that software, the first provider didn't work.
Yeah,
you had to really. So for your own experience, how do you deal with the mistakes or the failures like that? But also, how do we find that balance between creating a culture where we allow the people working with us, especially our staff, and that to be innovative, bring that in, try new things, try and deal with the mistakes, but also protect, so take those risks, but also protect the company.
Yeah.
So it's a balancing act.
Yeah, it is. So I think there's two things that I want to talk about. The first, and I'm going to tell you what they are up front just to keep me on track. The first thing is retrospectives. And the second thing is failing fast. So we instituted a retrospective at the end of every, when did we do it? It's the end of every month. So every month we would do a retrospective on every single customer. And we would say, what's worked this month? What hasn't worked this month? What do we need to double click on? Like we need to really push into, prioritize, and what do we need to stop doing altogether? And so we would answer that question as honestly as we could internally, and then we would take the answers back to the customer and say, Mr. Customer, the fact that you don't respond to emails has been very difficult for us to get anything over the line, and you need to stop doing that. If you're too busy, you need to give us somebody else to work with, because we can't move our project forward unless this happens. And so I found those retrospectives were really helpful to get us unstuck and to acknowledge honestly. See, one of the things about a retrospective is it's not about apportioning blame. It's not about saying you didn't send the email or you didn't follow up on the sales proposal. It's just about saying, where did we miss the mark and how do we fix it? And so if we can suspend judgment, suspend blame, and just talk about how we move forward and put one foot in front of the other, that is a very helpful conversation to have. But I think and maybe it's a female thing, we love as women to apportion blame. It was your fault because you didn't do the thing. And so I think that's something that I know I need to work on. It's always like, I want someone to take accountability for the fact that this project failed. That is a separate conversation. When you are having your retrospective, that is the kind of conversation you have in a one-on-one or in a performance review, a quarterly performance review. When you are talking about how to rescue something, how to stop something from failing, or acknowledging that something did fail and how do we recover from this, that conversation, all blame needs to be suspended, and we can talk in the third person if we want to, and we are just going to talk about what we have learned, what we are never going to do again, and what we are going to do differently going forward. So that's the first thing, is the retrospective tool. The second thing is about failing fast. So for me, if something is not working, acknowledge it quickly. I am the worst at this because I have a positive outlook problem, right? I feel like everything can be fixed. And every single person who I've ever hired could definitely be fixed. They would definitely fit into my organization. I just need to try harder. I need to lead harder. I need to lead with more heart. But it's not necessarily the case. We make hiring mistakes, and then we need to acknowledge that this was a hiring mistake and it's not working out, and we need to talk about how we fix this. Which part of the business are you better suited to? Is this really the right place for you? And it's a terrible, terrible conversation, especially in the South African context of our labor law. To make a hiring mistake is a terrible mistake to make as a business owner. And so I'm always the last person who wants to admit that I've made a mistake there. I want to fix the relationship. I want to fix the problem. So failing fast for me, I think, is acknowledging early on when you've made the wrong choice. When you have a project that is not going as it should. There were early signs with that project that I spoke about earlier. There were early signs. One of them being that the architect decided to immigrate to Australia. And, that was the architect that was assigned to us that had told me he could do all the things that he was going to do. And then he was gone. And the people who were left to pick up the pieces behind him were not adequately capable, but I kind of wanted to give them a chance. I wanted to give them an opportunity. So for me, it's that those retrospectives are pivotal in also acknowledging that you are failing, and help you kind of acknowledge that you are failing fast. And if you don't have those retrospectives, have you ever received an email from somebody and you look at that email, you're like, that could be bad news. I'm not going to open that email. And then you like, the curiosity gets the better of you and you open the email like, oh, it's actually good news. It's just that mental block that you don't want to open the email because you don't want to acknowledge that it could be bad news. And if it is bad news, you don't want to know. And it's the same thing with failure. You don't want to acknowledge the failure, because if you acknowledge the failure, then you have to unwind things and you have to change things, and change is hard. And acknowledging failure means that you have to take some accountability. But at the end of the day, you can't move forward unless you acknowledge the failure.
Yeah, and that's, I think, takes a lot of courage, is having those kind of conversations, but also being able to face the truth of the moment. Like really, as you say, acknowledging it's been absolute. I looked back at the book you talked about, The Radical Candor. I think that's one of your values, if I can recall. It's like how to be absolutely truthful about face what is right in front of us. Doesn't matter how hard it is, because you actually cannot make any adjustments until you accept what has happened or what is happening.
Yes.
It doesn't mean you like it. It doesn't mean it can't change. Acceptance is that acknowledging. It's like, this is what is. Let's do something now to fix it fast.
Yes.
So is your then approach then in terms of leadership is that the leader needs to have that strength of courage and the ability to face reality for what it is.
Yeah. And giving a new leader a framework to say, this is the retrospective framework. This is how you use it. This is, and I mean, the frameworks in Dare to Lead, the Braver framework that Brene Brown gives people in terms of how to have those tough conversations and to give people permission slips to say, you're allowed to have these conversations. When you have these conversations, let's all come up with some ground rules, because we know we're going to have one. So let's come up with some ground rules as a group, put it out there. And you go on the table. It's so interesting what people come up with. It's like, I'll have this conversation provided nobody swears. Okay, there we go. There's a ground rule. We're gonna watch our language. those kinds of things. I'll have this conversation, and I want to be able to acknowledge my part in it, but also be able to say what your part was, and you can't get offended. Okay, no one's going to get offended. So yeah, to be able to establish those ground rules, but people need frameworks. Like new managers need frameworks. Otherwise, they are just going to shy away from having these tough conversations, from acknowledging failure, from dealing with, from helping people take accountability for what they've messed up. You cannot just throw a manager in the deep end and expect them to have these conversations. It's not possible.
Well, I've got some rapid fire questions that I want to ask as we end off. But before we go there, just in terms of that segment as well, and resources for entrepreneurs. Flowcode is a very useful. I was met you at the launch of it with Alon Reyes, and yes. I know he's been on my show, so anyone can go and look at the few other episodes that we've had with him. But it's tell us a bit then about it as technology, but also the usefulness for entrepreneurs. And because it touches on strategy, so I think it's useful just to highlight that aspect.
Yes. So what Flowcode is, it's basically Alon Reyes has taken the Reyes Corp methodology of coaching entrepreneurs, and they have systematized it and digitized it. That is what it is. It is their methodology. It is their secret sauce. And he's now made it available to anyone. So you now no longer have to be a Reyes Corp entrepreneur. You just have to be an entrepreneur who wants to scale his business, or her business. That is like the prerequisite. And then you need to find a Flowcoder to work with. So if you work with Reyes Corp, they've got Flowcoders, and you can work directly with Reyes Corp and their Flowcoders. But the amazing thing is that they are building out a model where they are certifying business consultants and coaches to become Flowcoders. So I have become a certified Flowcoder. My business Solutioneers holds a Flowcoder license, and I can work with entrepreneurs who want to scale their businesses and use that Flowcode platform in their business. So what Flowcode does is it focuses on strategy, and it drives strategy into the business through a systematization of prioritized operational tasks and targets and projects and strategic objectives. So if you think about your old kind of OKR methodology, it takes that OKR methodology and it drives it into the business, so that at any one point in time, when you have a conversation with your leadership team or management team or an employee, you are having conversations both about operations and about strategy. And making sure that those tasks and targets are actually linked to strategy. Because what happens as business owners, this is E-Myth Revisited, right? We work on the business, not in the business when we're doing strategy. But a lot of the time we are execution focused. So we're working in the business. We become one of the resources working on the projects and working with the customers, and we get so sucked in to working in the business, which is operations, that we forget about the strategy part. And so what Flowcode does is it pulls you out of the detail and says, look at the strategy, look at the strategy, look at the strategy, look at the strategy. And it makes every single department look at the strategy, and it drives all of those operational tasks and links all of them to strategy. So they have seen phenomenal results with the businesses that they have worked with using Flowcode. And so I'm really excited to get going and start using it with my consulting customers to drive results and scale into their business.
And if anyone wants to know more information about Flowcode or some of the other consulting offers that you offer, how can they get hold of you?
So they can just pop me a mail, ann@solutioneers.co.za, or they can jump onto Facebook the Leaders Library has an Instagram page. Go have a look at that. So Facebook, Instagram. I do have a Solutioneers website if you want to go look there. Everywhere you can book a link, a call with me. I'm not hard to get hold of.
Great. And I'll put all those links into the show notes for people to find.
Thanks, Talana.
Great. So if I could ask you some rapid fire, some fun questions, just first answer that comes to mind. What comes to mind when I say risk?
Spending money that I don't have. Risk.
What is your secret weapon for bouncing back from a setback?
A good night's sleep.
That's interesting. So what's the most important lesson you've learned as an entrepreneur?
Goodness, that is a question. I think it's not to manage my money using the overall bank balance, but to manage it a lot more consciously by removing temptation money like that money was never mine anyway, or money that I owe a supplier, or money that I have to ring fence for a certain project that's coming up. Removing that out of my operational expenses account has given me a much more realistic view on the money that I do have available, and has really helped me to curb expenses and not get myself into trouble since I've been implementing the Profit First system in the last sort of 3 to 4 months. But yes, I think the most important thing for me has been, if I can sum that up a little bit better, has been as much of a visionary as I am, I still have to go into the minutiae of detail and do the bookkeeping and do the sales forecast and do the monthly budget, and spend some time in the detail to enable myself to then do the visionary work.
And what's the best advice you've ever received as an entrepreneur?
I did a keynote a while back, and one of my, I had somebody there who had been a bit of a mentor to me, sort of without him even knowing it. I'd been following him and watching all of his keynotes, and then all of a sudden he was doing the address before mine, and he stayed and he watched mine, and he came to me after. He was like, "You have something to say. Now will you get out there and say it?"
Awesome. What inspires you to get out of bed in the morning?
I have an 11-year-old who needs a lunchbox packed and breakfast made, and those things don't have, well, I mean, she's 11, so I guess she could do it all herself these days, but yeah, just the care and nurture of another human really gets me out of bed in the morning.
Great. So as we end off then, do you have a parting thought or wish or piece of advice or something to give to anyone who's listening and watching us around if they're really struggling with their fear of failure and hesitating to take the step into entrepreneurship? What would you say to them?
I don't think you can do this alone, but that doesn't necessarily mean you need a business partner. I think one of the scariest things about being an entrepreneur is the loneliness. And you don't know you're going to feel lonely when you start out. It's all exciting and have customers and it's going to be amazing. And then you suddenly realize whether you've got 5 people working for you or not, you suddenly realize how lonely it is to be that person who has to make all those decisions, whether you have a business partner or not. I would say entrepreneurs, find a community that can support you, that you can join, that you can bounce ideas off of, that hosts breakfasts or fireside chats or whatever the case is. You don't have to do this alone as an entrepreneur. There are lots of communities out there. Some of them you pay for, some of them are free, like the Leaders Library, but find the one that works for you, join it and get involved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Talana.
This has been Risk and Rise with me, Talana Simpson, as your host. I hope you're enjoying the journey as we keep learning more about overcoming the fear of failure, all the aspects of how to tackle risks, become more risk fit, and rise to the occasion of creating specifically businesses, but hopefully whatever it is that you want to create so that you can add your value to the world. I'd love to hear some feedback, and also if you could please give us a rating. If you could find the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, we'd really appreciate if you could follow there and leave a rating, give us some feedback, and help others to find the show so that we can all learn to overcome the fear of failure, create and add more value to the world, and learn to risk and rise together. Thank you for joining me on Risk and Rise, where we face fears, conquer challenges, and rise above adversity to achieve our dreams. Find out more at riskandrise.co.za.